Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for Vintage Books Live. Tonight we have Gary Corbin with us. Gary is a local author of mysteries and plays, I believe, as well. And we're just going to be talking about his latest book and some of his other work and what he's doing next. So I'm actually going to start. Usually, when I start about an interview with, like, tell us the story of how this book came to be. But I'm actually going to go back a little farther than that because we haven't gotten to talk to Gary for quite a while. COVID kind of messed everything up on that regard. So Gary has a series, the Woman of Valor series. Book 4 just came out recently. But could you go back and just kind of share a little bit about the series itself? So that people can kind of catch back up with what's going on with the series, what the original premise of the series was, and a little just kind of get everybody caught back up, and then a little bit about the book that just released.
Sure. Yeah. So the series, the Valerie Dawes thriller series, started with a Woman of Valor, and the main character of the series is Valerie Dawes. She's a rookie policewoman who has gone through some trauma in her life at the hands of evil men. And she is now, as a policewoman, empowered to sort of do something about that. And so she struggles a bit with the psychology of having this power now, the power to arrest, the power to draw a weapon, and so on, um, as she's learning to be a policewoman. Um, and her passion is to stop crimes against women and girls, what she suffered in her life. And her struggle is in figuring out which of the men that she comes into contact with, as most criminals tend to be men, which of them are good guys and which are bad guys. And not all of the bad guys are, robbers and murderers on the street. Some of them are also cops in her department. So that's sort of where the series got going. She's a woman with a Me Too past that wants it to stop for other women.
So this is book 4.
Yes.
Can you share a little bit about the book without giving too much away in case someone is going to start the series? And we do have the whole series at the store. So if anybody's interested in any piece of it, including the beginning, it's there waiting for you on the shelf. But can you talk a little bit more about book 4 without giving too much away about the other?
Sure. And I try to write them so that each book could be read without having read the other
Okay.
books. But if you read them out of order, it could get a little confusing because then there are giveaways. So in Mother of Valor, the 4th book in the series, Valerie's mother, who is she has not seen since she was 14 years old, reappears on the scene and wants to be a family again. Um, and the problem is that Val has a lot of anger still at her mother for leaving at a very crucial time in her life. And she's in the middle of a case involving urban terrorism, who are urban terrorists, she has learned, may be planning an attack on July 4th. And it's like July 1st. So she doesn't have a lot of time to really reconnect with her mother. But her mother plays a lot of emotional cards like, oh, did I tell you you had a younger brother now?
Oh,
That
my
sort of
goodness.
thing. So she's really trying to draw her in, and Val is really trying to balance, reconstructing her family life. She's just really gotten back in good terms with her father, because their relationship also fell apart over the years. And now her mother comes on the scene and complicates it all. So she's trying to solve a crime and also, fix her family at the same time.
Yeah, yeah. So how did you find the balance when you're writing, particularly a female character that is had some real serious trauma in her life, writing police characters in a time where that can be a little fraught too? Like, how do you find that balance? Where do you go to for sort of source material, or just making sure that you're kind of hitting the notes that you want to hit and not the ones you don't, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, boy, that's a big question to unpack, because there's really two big pieces of it. And one is I'm a man writing from the perspective of a woman, which is its own challenge. And then there is all of the uh, police activity, the brutality and the struggles that individual cops are also facing
Yeah.
at a time when some of their colleagues are not behaving in the best way. Um, so really, those two things come about, and I address them in different ways. The first one, which is, how do I, as a man, pretend to be able to write from the point of view of a woman? The truth is that in my initial drafts, I don't get it right all the time. Shocker, I know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I have 6 sisters, and they 5 of them were older than me, and they are not shy about letting me know when I get it wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
I also have some great women in my life who are great, like beta readers and alpha readers, who give me a lot of feedback, and in particular on, no, that's just not how a woman would deal with that situation.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not how she would think. So I'm learning a lot there, but just having been raised in a big family with a lot of sisters made me a little more sensitive to it.
Yeah.
I also have a really wonderful partner who is also not shy about correcting me. And
That's what we all
yeah,
need.
it comes down to, I have to be willing to be teachable on
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
I have to understand that I'm coming up at this from the perspective of someone who is underinformed, and I need to learn.
Yeah.
So I put it out there, and I find out what I think
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
right, and then I find out what really works. On the police side, it's more challenging because I'm not a police officer. I've never been one. I know some, but it's a tough world out there, and
Yeah.
things have
Yeah.
changed a lot for police officers. Obviously, I read as much as I can, both fiction and nonfiction, to educate myself. Um, but other than that, I try to again be sensitive to the things that they face. When I first started this series, first started working on it, I met with some police officers, and in particular a sergeant on the Hartford, Connecticut police force. At the time, I was thinking of setting it in Hartford. I changed my mind about that, but I learned quite a bit talking with Hartford police.
Yeah.
And this woman walked through quite a bit of what sort of things they face, and what things that she faced in particular as a female police officer, because it's a little different.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
challenges are greater for women than they are for men. I mean, they have all the challenges men have, plus. I think it
Yeah.
was Barack Obama said of Hillary Clinton, she had to do everything he had to do, but backwards and in heels. And
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
sort of that way for female police officers.
Yeah.
They've got to do all the stuff men do, plus prove that they're capable of being police as women, plus any mistake that a man would make is twice as bad if it's a woman.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, we've seen some police violence cases where the officer was a woman, and there's really no mercy
Yeah.
given to female officers who are in
Yeah.
the same situation, take the same actions as male police officers.
Yeah.
So it's a real education.
Yeah. No, it's I love that. I love that perspective of, if you're going to write something that you really don't know, that you have to be willing to learn. And I think that's actually true. I mean, you think about it, authors are always writing people they don't know, and situations they don't know. And so yeah, we just have to be willing to learn and grow and let ourselves be challenged if we mess up.
Yeah.
All of that. So your previous series, I'm trying to remember because that one's been a little while ago. But the Mountain Man series, was that also police procedural?
Sort of, that's amateur sleuth.
Okay. Okay.
And so that I have a lot more comfort level with, because that character could have been any of my uncles or cousins. he's a backwoods guy, a forester, who, um, you know, he's constantly having run-ins with the law, and they're blaming him for things that are not his fault. So he has to go around trying to solve the
Figure it
case
out.
for
Yeah.
them, you know, in order to keep himself, or in the case of the second book in that series, his fiance out of jail. So in that case, it's Guy. It's a forester, you know, which is there are a lot of those in my family. You know, and you know, it's sort of an everyman.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I didn't face quite the same challenges
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
If he, you
I'm
know,
curious. I'm curious what draws you to that type of story. You know, the like a mystery, police procedural, or solving something. I know that I like enjoy British mysteries and watch lots of them. So I know, I know why I like them, but I'm curious, like as a writer, what draws you to those types of stories? And what do those types of stories, what challenges, aside from the people and the situations, like just from a technical point of view, when you're writing, what kind of challenges do you have when you're trying to create a believable, like, mystery essentially, and put things in sequences that the reader can that are believable and don't give too much away? Like what kind of experience is that like for you as a writer?
yeah, when you're writing a mystery, what I learned early on is you can write yourself into a box in a hurry if you don't have a pretty good idea of what really, quote unquote, really happened, you know, at the end. When you start writing, if you just dive in and start writing a mystery, you can build yourself into this maze that you can't get out of because there's too many clues, or aren't enough clues, and you can't figure it out yourself. So you have to figure out what the crime is and who really did it and how before you even get going. Otherwise, you can get really lost. So I think I got into it because the mysteries and police stories really push people to an extreme limit in their lives. It's always a very traumatic, stressful situation, and people learn, what they're capable of and what they're not capable of. We see the best and the worst side of them, and I think that's really interesting in terms of the human nature. And I read a lot of them, and I've just always, I mean, even as a little kid, I watched all the Perry Mason and Matlock, and all the good and the bad and the ugly of those shows. And just always thought those are really cool. And then I kind of almost trapped myself into the genre by coming up with the idea for my first book, which was actually in my other series, the very first series I did, the Lying in Justice series, where in Lying in Judgment, a man is serving on the murder trial, on the jury of a murder trial for the crime that he committed. So I've been on a jury, I had that experience. So I was kind of working from, the benefit of that, but I had to learn all this court stuff and legal stuff. And,
go watch extra episodes of Matlock and Perry Mason.
Right. And Murphy Brown, and all of them. So once you get into it, it's like, well, if people like it, they say, well, I want more of that. It's then tough to turn around and write historical fiction or period fiction.
That's true. Once you get a comfort level with a certain genre, it's a little more scary to break out something else.
Plus, you've invested in it, you've learned all this stuff, and you get more ideas as you're going. So, I can't put that in this book, I'll save it for another book. Kind of plot commits you, to another book.
So I'm really curious, because I really love that premise of the person who committed the crime being on the jury for the trial. How did that, was that one of those ideas that just like popped into your head? Because I know that definitely happened. Or was there some like circumstance that made you think of that?
Yeah, there was a circumstance. It was actually, to me, I think it's funny what happened. I was living in Washington, D.C. in the 90s, early 90s. And was at a party that you got, cocktail party sort of thing that you do in DC. And one of my friends was at the time serving on a jury, and he was telling what he could of his experience because they were still underway. And he said the judge had told them to disregard the testimony of the witness that they had just heard. Some technicality, right? They had to throw it out. Whoops, I just disconnected my headphones for a second. So it got me to thinking, well, how do you disregard evidence that you know? And that just got me to thinking, and one thing led to another, and I think, well, what if you're the only one that knows something because you did it? And then it was like, well, you're on a jury, it might as well be the big one, a murder.
Yeah.
So that was where the premise came from. But then how to write that book? First of all, I was a poli-sci intern in Washington, D.C. I didn't know anything, right? I didn't know how to write a book. I didn't have time to write a book. But I wrote it down and I started just, Word Perfect 4.2. I still have the file.
Oh my gosh.
And I just every so often would go open it up and I would jot down a little bit more. And over the course of, it was over 20 years that I finally developed how the story could work, how he could have committed this murder, be on the jury, go through part of the trial and still not know it's his murder until, certain telling facts come out. Because there's so many ways that he could be kicked off the jury and, make a mistake and so on and so forth. So
so he doesn't know it's the one he did either.
Until
that's even more interesting.
For the first part of the book, he doesn't know. So it's a big revelation as the trial's going on.
Oh, that's fascinating. I love that. Yeah, I actually really like I tend to like the ones that aren't quite as dark. But I think the other thing I like about the police procedural shows is there's at least in the TV land, it gets resolved at the end.
Right.
And all the bad guys go to jail. There's some level of, I've always wondered, why do I like these? But I really do. But I think that there's probably some level of comfort where,
Sure,
everybody does their job, and the people who should go to jail, and so
when you read one that doesn't deliver on that promise, you feel really cheated. So I've read a few of those and really, why did you bother writing this book?
Or it doesn't make sense, or and honestly, then it's good to read those occasionally though, because it does help you appreciate the craft of being able to. I've always just admired anybody who could have the presence of mind to organize all the things to happen in the right order, and so the right bad guy is the bad guy. My brain probably couldn't do that, but do you have I know probably COVID was a big smasher in this, but do you have particular writing practices, things that you do that work for you? How do you, some people say you got to write every day. Other people are, certain times of day or certain times of the week or certain times of the year that they write. Is there something that you sort of stumbled into as you go along the way that?
Well, I think it's changed over time. When I first started, I was, I had a day job, and, I had to squeeze it in. So I, had to regiment quite a bit more. It had to be at, these certain times when I could sit down and write. I've retired now, so I can write when I want to, when it fits the schedule. But I also have the ability to, I have 8 hours to choose from during the day. So it really, I tend to, the general practices, I get the sort of day-to-day business stuff of life done first in my day. And then usually it's in the afternoons that I have a block of time. That's one thing I do need, is a block of time.
Yeah.
If it's not, if it's less than an hour, I feel very frustrated. I don't get very far.
Yeah.
Sometimes it takes me an hour just to
Yeah.
write the stuff I'm throwing away.
Yeah, it takes you an hour. For me, I have to get in the headspace. And so, if it's 45 minutes, I'll have gotten into the headspace, 20
Yeah,
minutes in, and there's not enough real time to really do anything. So,
yeah. So, and then in terms of the creative process, I I have, there's two big schools of thought. You've probably heard this before: the plotters and pantsers, right?
yes.
People who plot, people who write by the seat of their pants. I do really neither of those, or maybe a hybrid of those.
Yeah.
Um, I sketch, so I don't really outline, but I plan. So I know before I start who the main character is, who the main antagonist is, how they conflict, what's going to get them into, the big confrontation, and how the hero's going to get out of it, how they're going to
Yeah.
resolve it. That much I know. The rest is sort of pantsing. It's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
I think I need to do this and this and this,
Yeah.
and that may all move around, but it's really, it flows.
When you're working, so that's the storytelling portion of it. When you're working on the mystery, do
Mm-hmm.
you also are like, okay, here's who did it. Here are the people that I'm going to set up as suspects.
Yeah,
Does that kind of stuff ahead of time, or is that kind of stuff that more
I
comes along?
I do some of that. Like I'll know the who done it. I know
Yeah.
who did it and how, but I don't plan out in advance all of the red herrings. I let some of those arise organically,
Yeah. Yeah.
because I get better ideas as I go.
Yeah.
I'll usually have at least one or two, so that in early on when I'm writing, I can set those up. But I have no problem introducing three, four, half a dozen more as the book
Yeah.
goes on.
Yeah.
My current
Do you
writing group they're going a little crazy right now because they said, I thought I know who did it, but
I love that. You're like,
yeah, exactly.
so do you find that you have moments where you are just as surprised
Oh,
because you're like,
heck yeah.
oh yeah, okay.
Oh yeah. And usually it's when I'm either taking a shower or trying to go to sleep at night.
Oh, well, yes,
Those
especially the going to
ideas.
sleep at night. You're like,
Yeah.
oh crud, I gotta get up and write
Yep.
it down because it won't
Absolutely.
be there in the morning if you don't
Right.
write it
It
down.
won't. Sometimes it's not even there when I reach my desk and try to write it down. It's like,
Yeah,
oh, it's
yeah.
already gone.
That's the worst thing.
But yeah, and also when I'm writing, I use a writing tool called Scrivener
Oh
that is
yeah, yeah,
great for that because you can just
yeah,
really fast, throw the idea into another text file that you can get
yeah,
back to
yeah.
whenever. You don't even have to figure out where it goes yet. So
So I suspect because I've talked to enough people, I suspect that most people are some mixed version of plotter and pantser. And I'll just pop in for people who I suspect most people who have listened to any sort of author thing have heard those terms before, but plotters are people who plan the whole book out ahead of time, often have outlines and detailed plans and you know, it's almost like the police boards when they're solving the
right.
mystery on the show where everything goes everywhere and you know exactly what's going to happen. And then pantsers are people who just sit down and write and they find out when, as they go along.
Mhm.
But I think that most writers are some variation in the middle, that
Mhm.
they know pieces of it, maybe not all, maybe they plan a little bit more, a little bit less, but I haven't met very many people who are all one way or all the other way. There's usually
Yeah.
some version in between.
Larry Brooks insists that whether you're a plotter or a pantser, you do an outline. You just may not do it until you're done.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, and I think the other thing that happens is that you everybody's doing some version of telling themselves the story
Sure.
first and then going back and editing. And what if you're a plotter, then you're probably telling yourself a lot of the story in the form of the outline. Whereas if you're a pantser, you're telling yourself the story in the form of an actual draft. but even either way, you're gonna edit and move around and change
Yeah.
stuff anyway. So
Yeah.
I think the end result ends up being pretty much the same for everybody. It's some of it's like how much editing do you have to do? Like I think pantsers end up having to go back and do more, and plotters sometimes less, but sometimes not either. So
Yeah. It
um,
really depends on the person. It's a matter of
yeah,
fit,
yeah.
you know.
And the book, honestly, sometimes it
Right.
just comes, and sometimes you're just like squeezing blood from a stone, and you're gonna go back and do a ton of editing. But you also write plays though, or have in
Mhm.
the past.
Mhm.
How is how do you find writing novels and writing plays to be like a similar practice, and how do you find them to be really different?
Well, they're both storytelling, and at their core, you're trying to tell a really good story and leave, or the viewer or the reader in suspense, until the end. What's really going to happen? You know, um, for me, for whatever reason, when I write plays, I write comedies, and when I write novels, it's mysteries, and crime. I don't know why, dramas. Um, I find that plays are really dialogue centric,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and books are more like psychologically centered. Whereas the third form, which is screen, is very action oriented.
Yeah.
But even those are oversimplifications. A play has to have action, and so does a
Yeah.
book, and
Yeah.
they all have to have dialogue, and so on and so forth. But it's really a matter of emphasis. A screenplay can be written with 50 lines of dialogue.
Yeah. Yeah.
And on a play that gets you into scene two.
Yeah.
uh, so that's one thing that's different. The plays are shorter, and they have to be a much more condensed form. They're
Yeah.
probably the most condensed. Screenplays, you have to work so much on what the visual is. They tend to be a little bit long in terms of the writing product,
Yeah. Yeah.
the script. And then novels, of course, are the longest.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's a much more sustained and intricate um, construction of plot and character, and much more nuanced.
Yeah.
With a play, it's a little more broad brush.
Yeah.
You know,
Do you find with a play, because I'm trying to think, in a novel, you have some, you're trying not to overdo it, but you have some license to give some exposition of
yeah,
who's
to some
thinking
extent.
what where, whereas the play, it really is coming out all in the dialogue, but you have to make the dialogue seem natural. You can't stop and say, okay, here's all this exposition. I
Yeah,
mean, I suppose I watch some plays where they do that, but they're not they're
yeah,
not
it's
as good.
horrible.
Or it has to be like tongue in cheek, like
Right,
no, wink, wink,
Oscar Wilde style.
well, we're doing this on purpose kind of a thing. But
Right.
um yeah, it just seems like an interesting thing to practice both because they're just a different type of it's not have you done screenwriting as well?
I've done very little of it. I was involved with the 48-hour film festival last year, which was really fun, and a couple of small video projects, or you know screen projects, but nothing of any length.
Yeah.
Not like a full feature length. I do find it a very different type of writing.
Yeah, I would think.
Uh,
So do you spend
Plays,
that one, are you spending a lot more time thinking about the descriptions of the visual that are going to go along with whatever's going on and
in novel writing. Oh, in screens,
in
yeah,
screen?
screenplay,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
for sure, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it's really that's the focus, is what will people see. And I
Yeah.
think, though, having dabbled in that, having done, a bunch of work in both plays and novels, they each, inform the other. If you don't have enough action or visual in a play, it gets very boring. It's all talking
Yeah.
heads.
Yeah.
And same with the others. They have to have a mix.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just that the balance can be a little different. Exposition tends not to work in any of them.
Yes.
um,
Yeah. You have to be careful with that. Yeah.
yeah, I mean that's fine for nonfiction, right?
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing is even in nonfiction, well, I write for kids, so it's a little bit different. I haven't done a whole lot for adults, but definitely for kids. As soon as you launch into too much exposition, then it's boring. They
Yeah.
don't want to. It has to be, there has to be that story arc, or it doesn't hold the attention. So yeah, you have to, even with the nonfiction, I mean, you're still disseminating like nonfiction, but it definitely needs to be, you throw a sentence in here or there that's pure exposition, but then you're trying to keep the narrative going. And
Yeah, and I found
yeah,
that to be true even with tech writing. If you're not spinning a narrative, it gets boring really
yeah,
fast.
yeah,
You know.
yeah. And then people are just like, wait a minute, I've read 3 pages and I don't know any of it.
Yeah.
Uh, so I'm curious, you said you have a writing group, and I'm
Yep.
curious, what are you working on for next? Like that you can talk about, because I realize at some stages you maybe not ready to talk about it yet.
Actually, I'm really close to finishing the 5th novel of the Valerie Dawes thriller
Oh,
series.
wonderful. That's awesome.
So yeah, and it's it also dives into the urban terrorism issue a bit, although in a different way. Um, so it's the same main character, but a different antagonists and a different whole style. It involves, just as a teaser, the voluntary incelibates, the weird men's rights groups people.
Ah.
If there's any of
You
those people
do give
watching right now,
yourself,
I just lost them.
I was gonna you do give yourself some hard topics.
But it's interesting, and
Yeah,
that's
yeah, for
I don't
sure.
want to write about just stuff I already know, or
Yeah,
it's just
yeah,
every ho hum everyday police stuff. I want to get into that stuff. It's more interesting.
yeah.
Um, and like I say, when I'm almost done, I have like a chapter left to write. It's really down to the very end of the first draft.
Yeah, yeah.
Have a lot of revising to do. But then I don't know if I'll continue with that, or start something new, or get back into playwriting. I haven't written much in the stage area
Yeah,
since right before COVID. Or
yeah,
actually,
yeah.
I was involved in Fertile Ground Festival, the last one they had, before COVID or during COVID, I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
And now that took a hiatus, so we'll see if it comes back next year. But I may dive back into that.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds great. Well, I just lost my train of thought. We'll go to the next question. Oh, I know what I was going to ask. It was just um when you're thinking about a series, like do you think, when you sat down to write Women of Valor, did you plan for it to be a series, or was that also something that just sort of came as it was going to come?
I didn't, and it's interesting because in the first draft of A Woman of Valor, way back when, um, the main character dies, which is a really bad approach if you're trying to write a series.
Yeah, it does cause a problem.
And the
Unless
reason,
it's fantasy and they're going to come back as a ghost.
yeah, and the reason for that is that, I mean, writers all the time, we get approached by people and they say, "Hey, you're a writer. I've got an idea for a book. You should write it." And we like, ideas aren't hard, right?
Yeah,
Ideas
yeah.
we got. You write your book. But in this case, it was my father, who I know is not going to write a book, and he he said, "I've got a story idea you should write." All right, since it's my dad, I'll listen.
Yeah, yeah.
And he laid it out, and I was like, "Wow, that's really good." um, I usually don't do this, but I think I was so we agreed we would write it together, and we worked on it together. I did the actual plinking at the typewriter, but we worked out the storyline together, and he had written out the first outline. He outlined what he thought it should be, very simple outline. And in his version of the story, she had to die. And I was like, okay, well, I'll write that, but I'll write an alternate ending too, and we'll see. We'll talk about it. And he didn't like my alternate, and I didn't like his. But before we worked it out, he passed of cancer, and so I set it aside for a long time, and I came back to it. I was like, nope, she can't die.
Yeah, yeah.
So no,
Sorry,
that one
Dad,
definitely was, yeah,
but
it definitely
yeah,
was not going to be a series. The
yeah,
only one that kind of struck me that would be a series early on was the Mountain Man one, just because I knew it's a fun character
yeah,
in a fun setting, rural Oregon, bunch of country bumpkins, in these high stakes legal
yeah,
wars that they don't understand. It's just too much fun.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, I can keep going with that.
What's your revision process like? So you said you're just about to get done with the first draft of the
Yeah.
fifth one. Like for you personally, like what does that look like?
So first I leave it up for a while.
Yeah,
Leave it alone. Just set it aside. It might just be a few weeks, but for some time, I'll take a vacation from it. And then I reread it as if, this is a finished book and I'm critiquing it. And so I'll go through it. I'll read it first, and then oftentimes the second time through, but I'll take a lot of notes. And in Scrivener, you can just put those, right in there. It's really handy. And then I'll go through and review all the feedback from my writing group, which comes in 2-week chunks. And I'll come up with a plan for how this book needs to change. Usually I'll have like a 1 or 2 page strategy document of how this thing needs to change. The big picture stuff and some of the detail things. Because, first drafts, things don't always hang
yeah,
together.
yeah. No,
Something doesn't.
no.
So I'll go through sort of a plot revision. And then I have a series of editing passes that I do that are more writing oriented. Like this character's voice is too uneven. I've got to go through and just read the scenes that
Yeah,
character's in,
yeah,
and things like that. And then there's grammar ones, and
yeah,
just,
yeah.
oh, I'm using too many adverbs or whatever.
Yeah. How many times per page should I do that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. The
Yeah.
word just, I
Yeah.
use it so often.
Yeah.
I've got to go
I
back and
love
cut
that.
90% of them
That's
off.
one of the things I love about like being a writer and talking to other writers is I find that every single one of us has like words that we tend to use over and over, or like I love M dashes, and
Yeah.
so there's always way too many M dashes in my documents and I have to go back and fix it. But and usually first draft I'm just like, it's fine, I'll just let myself
Right.
do it, but I know I'm going to be coming back and like pulling them off.
Yeah, for sure.
It's fun to see what everybody's little things do that they do that they know they do, and they're just like, yeah, okay, I'll come back and fix it later.
Right.
So so I always like to ask at the end, what have you been reading lately that you really enjoyed that you would recommend to other people?
Yeah. So one book that I just um, read by a local author, Kate Court. I read her new book, Tempered, which love Kate Court. She's got like 3 books, and they're all terrific. Um, and let's see, Bob Dugoni. I read almost everything he does. He's a writer out of Seattle, and he does either legal or police procedural type of things. And he had a new one called Her Deadly Game, and I thought that was really good. He has a whole Tracy Crosswhite series that's terrific. And Scott Turow had a new book. I guess it was last year, but I just read it recently, called Suspect. And what was really clever, I mean, he's just terrific legal thriller type of writer, but he used every version of the word suspect as a main theme in the book.
Oh,
To
interesting.
be suspicious, to be someone that is suspected, to believe, all these different iterations of the meaning of the word. And it was really nicely done. Very
That's
elegant.
cool. Yeah. So Kate Court, you said that
Yes.
she's local.
Yeah.
Does she
Um,
have other stuff besides her most recent one?
yeah, she has, let's see. So Tempered is the recent one, and that's a sequel to Glass, her first book, and oh, I'm blanking on the
That's okay. I can look her up
another
too,
one.
but now anytime I hear that someone's local, it's like, oh, really? Okay, who else do I need to add to my list?
Yeah, you definitely want to talk to Kate. She's really good. Her book just came out like a month or two ago.
Okay, okay.
Um, and yeah, she's a wonderful person too.
Well, great. Thank you so much for talking to us. And I just wanted to remind everybody that you can buy Gary's books, the Woman of Valor series, at the bookstore right now. And if you're interested in, let's see, Lying in Judgment, or no, Lying in, what was the first one?
Yeah, Lying in Judgment,
Okay,
and
Lying
yeah,
in Vengeance, is that right?
Lying in Vengeance is the sequel. Yeah.
Okay. And then the Mountain Man series, any of those, just let me know because I know that I can hit Gary up and get them back in the store. We haven't had them in a little while just because they're older and we've got not a ton of shelf space for new books, but we can always grab them and get them back in for you if you're interested in that and you've heard about another books that you're interested in. So yeah, give us a call or come in the store and grab Gary's books. And thank you again, Gary, so much for talking to us. It was really fun.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Have a good night.
You too.